Hey, this is Stan. Today I'm going to make a video on swapping dirt bike or dual sport tires. It's something a lot of guys struggle with. You see a lot of questions on internet forums, a lot of posts about people bloodying up their knuckles, throwing tools across the garage, all kind of horror stories. It's not something that needs to be difficult. It's actually easy if you use good technique. It's something I used to struggle with, but I ride a DRZ on the street every day with knobby tires on it, and the pavement eats them up quickly. So I've gotten a lot of practice swapping tires over the years, and in the process, I've learned some techniques that have made the job a lot easier. And like I said, I used to struggle with it, but now it's a breeze. It's no problem at all. So I'm going to go ahead and make a video on the techniques that work for me, and hopefully maybe they can help some guys out. So let's get started. Okay, so as with any job, one of the first things you want to do is make sure you have all the tools that you need. I do recommend, even at home, only using tools that you're going to have with you on the trail. The reason for that is eventually you will get a flat out in the trail and you'll need to fix it out on the trail. If you've practiced a lot at home with the tools that you'll have with you, then you'll be good at it and it's not a big deal, and fixing a flat out on the trail is easy. So some of the first things you'll need obviously are tire spoons. I like to use 3. You really only need 2, but I do find that having a third one makes it a lot easier, so I go ahead and bring 3. You'll notice one of them has an axle nut wrench built into it. It's a good thing to have out on the trail with you. I actually, when I'm fixing flats, I actually don't take the wheel off the bike. I just patch the tube with the wheel still on the bike, but I still like to have an axle nut wrench with me just in case for some reason I need to take the wheel off the bike. You'll notice that my spoons are not that long. These are like 10, maybe 11 inches long. That's all you really need. A lot of guys will be like, oh, it's difficult, then, you know, get a bigger tire spoon, get more leverage. You'll get a bigger hammer and hit it harder kind of philosophy, which is obvious, you know, often a good philosophy, but not in this particular case. The problem with using a big spoon like this, the main problem is you're not going to have this with you out on the trail, so if you're used to using this and then you have to use these, you might have a problem. You know, these fit nicely in the Camelback, this not so much. The other problem with using a big spoon like this is that it encourages you to just kind of muscle your way through it. And you shouldn't do that. If you're having trouble, if it's hard, that means you're doing something wrong. So what you want to do rather than just muscle through that is, you know, back off, take a deep breath, figure out what's going wrong, what you're doing wrong, and then fix it. Just muscling your way through it, you bloody up your knuckles, you can actually break a bead on a tire and ruin the tire. So don't use those. I should give that away to somebody at some point in time. I don't use it anymore. Okay, this is a valve stem fishing tool. This is something else I don't use anymore. I've learned some techniques that don't require fishing the valve stem, and they make things a lot easier. But I do bring this with me because it has a valve core remover, and you do want to pull the valve core out of the valve stem before you start taking the old tire off. Motion Pro Bead Buddy. This is something you definitely do not need, but a lot of guys don't use them, but I personally find that it makes the job easier. Doesn't weigh that much, isn't that big. I go ahead and throw it in my Camelback and bring it with me. 12mm wrench. My rim lock nuts are 12mm, so I need a wrench to be able to loosen them up. Tire lube. There's purpose-made tire lube. A lot of guys use Windex. This is a Windex bottle, but it's not actually Windex. It is Dawn dish detergent mixed with water. I don't actually use this anymore, though. Once you get your technique down, you really don't need any lube. And if you don't use lube, the job is a lot less messy. There's nothing wrong with using lube. And I used to use a lot of it, and it certainly doesn't hurt anything. The only thing is mixing liquid with the inherent dirtiness of tires makes a mess. So if you skip the lube, it's not quite as messy of a job. Baby powder. You want to either coat your tube in baby powder or put it inside the tire. What that does is it acts as like some lubrication between the inner tube and the inside of the tire. Prevents the tube from chafing on the inside of the tire, and also prevents it from kind of catching on the inside of the tire as you're inflating it, and that allows the tube to inflate nice and easily. Those two things are keys to preventing flats. So you do want to use some baby powder in there. And then the other thing is a heat gun. Warm tires are much easier to mount and dismount, especially mount, than cold tires. In the summertime, I just throw my tires out in the sun for an hour. In the winter, I'll just put them over a heat register. I have forced air heating. and that warms them up nicely. Right now it's night, so I can't put them out in the sun, and it's summer, so I don't have the furnace on, so I heat them up using a heat gun. And I do think it's worth taking. It takes like 10 minutes for the tire, but it makes it a lot easier. I think it's worth it. That's it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and pull the wheel off the bike, which I'm not going to bother showing you. Hopefully you know how to do that. But once I get the wheel off the bike, I'll be back, and I'll show you the techniques that have made this job a lot easier for me than it used to be. Okay, I got the wheel off the bike. I'm going to throw it up here on my quote-unquote tire stand, which is just a 30-gallon drum or 33-gallon drum or whatever it is. Works pretty well. Having a actual bolted to the floor tire stand is nice. I don't have one of those. You can't actually just do it on the floor. A lot of guys do them on the floor. I like having it up a little bit easier on your back. You want to go ahead and take the nut off of the valve stem. Step number 1. And then go ahead and take your valve core remover tool, put it on there, and pull out the valve core. Unscrew it. Make sure it doesn't go flying. Catch it. There it is. Put it all somewhere you're not going to lose it. Okay. Next step is to loosen up your rim locks or rim lock. I run 2 rim locks per wheel. Contrary to internet lore, doing so does not make changing tires any harder. The reason I run 2 per wheel is that they balance each other out. I have a plate on my KTM, and my other bike is a DRZ that I use on the street. And when riding on the street, you don't want to have just one rim lock that's not balanced, because you'll get crazy wheel hop. One option is to put a shitload of weights on the wheel 180 degrees across from the rim lock to balance it. The other option is to just have 2 rim locks. They balance each other, and they apparently seem to overwhelm any other imperfections in the tire or wheel, because I have never had to balance a tire, and I've never had any problems with the tires being out of balance. So once you loosen your rim lock nuts, don't take them all the way off, just loosen them out to the end, and then go ahead and push them up into the tire so they're nice and loose. Okay, and I just kind of push down on the tire. You won't actually break the bead this way. Usually, once in a while you might, but it just kind of gets it started. And then to break the bead, I just use tire spoons. A lot of guys, there are purpose-made tools for this. A lot of guys will make one. I just find that if you just go around with a tire spoon, eventually it'll break. Sometimes it breaks right away. This one's breaking like already, which is nice. Usually they don't break this easily. I'm not sure why this one's breaking so easily. Usually you have to go around a couple times, but that's no big deal. Just keep going around a couple times and it'll break. You can tell it's broken because there's a nice gap between the tire and the rim. That side's broken. Start this side. Push that up. I like to start braking at one of my rim locks. Doesn't really matter. Later on, for putting a new tire on, it does matter where you start. For taking this, for breaking the bead, it really doesn't. You can see, okay, so this side's not breaking as easily as the other one. This is more typical, actually. Be careful you don't do that. Kill yourself. This is more typical. You just have to go around a few times. Just keep going around. Keep going around. Kind of feels like it's starting to go. There we go, maybe. Getting there. And you just keep going around. Sometimes you have to go around like 3 or 4 times. No big deal. Just keep going, there it goes. See? Nice and easy. Now, I've seen some guys comment on some other videos and like, oh, they're using soft motocross tires, it's easy. I'd like to see them do that with dual sport tire. This is an MT16, this isn't a dual sport tire. I've done lots of dual sport tires, XCMHs, 606s, etc. They're not any harder. Actually, the Kenda 270 is the easiest tire I've ever swapped. That tire is like a trials tire, so soft. It's really easy to spoon on and off. Okay. So now, you want, as you noticed, I broke the bead on both sides. You want to do that before you start levering the tire off. Now the beads are broken. I'm going to go ahead and start levering the tire off. Now, what you want to do is I usually start in between my 2 rim locks. And you want to put all 3 spoons in first before you start to lever it off. And then once you get all 3 of them in there, not too far apart, that might be a little too far apart. Just make sure they're all under there. And then just make sure the opposite side of the tire from where you're working, that the bead is down in the dish. Hasn't started to reseat itself. And then go ahead and just pry up the first one. I do this a lot in case I catch any of the tube doing this, will help to encourage the tube to slide off of the spoon and not pinch. And then just go ahead, pull it down. See, I lost one of my spoons, which kind of sucks, but not that big of a deal. Popped out. See, now getting this in there will be a little bit trickier than if I had already had it in there. Just go ahead and work it in. Helps if you don't put them in upside down. You can hook these under the disc. You're not going to hurt the disc at all. Now you'll notice here, maybe if you can see on the camera, I did kind of rip the rubber around the bead a little bit, but it's just the rubber. The bead itself is actually still fine. So the rubber doesn't matter. This tire's actually been on and off of rims a few times, which is why that's like that. Now, you know, some people might look at this tire and say, why are you changing it? It looks good to me. This tire is great for just trail riding on the road. This shaped tire is absolutely fine. But have a race coming up, and for racing, or if you really want to get the most out of your trail riding, these tire is totally shot. It's rounded. The knobs are rounded off. They're relatively short compared to a new one. They're actually starting to cup a little bit. So for purposes of racing or a trail ride where, you know, it's like a once a year kind of ride, you're going someplace special, you might want to throw a new tire on there. I will save this tire for probably after the race. I'll take my race tire back off and put this one back on so I don't wear down the race tire. Okay. Again, now same deal. Actually, I'm going to start on the other side though. Put all 3 of these in ahead of time. Try to not lose them this time. But sometimes they don't want to stay in there. Hook that under there, bang, bang. See how much easier that is when you get 3, you pull the middle one out. This first next one's sometimes a little tricky to get in. Again, that back and forth is just to try to encourage, in case the tube's caught on the end of it, kind of encourage the tube to slide off of it. Helps prevent pinch flats. Knock on wood, I have not pinch flatted a tube while changing a tire in several years. Now I probably will. Since I said that, I probably will do that right now. Okay, now the one other thing I didn't mention that you want to notice though is that I took both beads off of the side of the rim they were touching. So this side I took off of this side of the rim, and then I flipped the tire over and took the other bead off of the other side of the rim so that the wheel ends up inside of the tire. A lot of guys instead will just keep it the same way and try to spoon the other bead off of the same side of the rim. That's much more difficult. That's not the technique that you want to use. You want to do it this way so that the wheel ends up inside of the rim. Pull the make sure you get the valve stem up through the hole. So what you'll notice there that I turned it over. I did have it the other way. I turned it over so that the valve stem was at the top, so I could push the rim down, and that caused the valve stem to pop up through. And now all I have to do is grab the rim, twist it, pull it out like this, and then just pull it right out of the tire. So that's all there is to getting the old tire off. You can see that was easy, did not require any swearing or throwing of tools or bloody knuckles. Now pull the inner tube out, put your rim up on your old tire. It's going to serve as your tire stand to put the new one on. Now, take a look at your inner tube. Some guys like to replace inner tube with every tire change. I change tires a lot. That would end up being a lot of inner tubes, so I don't do that. This tube is fine. I'm going to put the valve core back in now. Tighten it up. And you can see how dirty already my hands are, even though I'm not using lube. If this were all wet with tire lube, it'd be like 5 times messier. Okay. Now I am going to use my pump just for this one thing, which is just to inflate this tube a bit. There's 2 reasons for that. First reason is I want to make sure I didn't damage it, didn't puncture it while I was taking the old tire off. Pretty sure I didn't, but gotta check. So you just want to pump it up enough so it has some air in it, so it holds its shape. Squeeze it, listen. I don't hear any air coming out anywhere. Just kind of visually inspect it. It's dirty, which you would expect, but it doesn't look chafed at all. This tube is perfectly fine to just keep using, so I'm going to reuse it. To prepare it to be reused, I'm going to go ahead and I leave the valve stem in from now on, but just push on it and let all the air come out of it that'll come out of it without squeezing it. You want it to have just enough air in it to hold its shape, which is where I'm at now. It'll just start to crease over your finger. Not totally, but a little bit. That's about a good amount of air to have in it for when we put the new tire on. Okay, so now I'm going to go grab the new tire. This tire has seen 1 race so far. You can see, compared to the old tire, how the knobs are nice and sharp. They're a little rounded off on this edge. So what I'm going to actually do is when I go to put this tire on, I'm going to make sure that the sharp edge is positioned so that as the tire goes around, the sharp edge digs into the ground to drive it forward. Now I'll get a little better traction than I will on that rounded edge. It's the rounded edges, it doesn't seem like much, but it really is noticeable, the difference. At least I find it to be. Okay, so next step is I'm going to use a heat gun and heat the tire up. So what I'm going to do is just turn it on. I'm going to stick it inside of here and just kind of go around like this. I'm going to do it on the inside the whole way around, and then on the outside like this on both sides. I'm not going to film all this because it's going to take probably 5-10 minutes. So I'm going to shut off the camera, I'm going to do that, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I got the tire nice and warm with the heat gun. And the next step is going to be to put the inner tube inside the tire, but before we do that, I want to go ahead and put some baby powder in there, which I'm going to go out to my garage to do that, because it kind of makes a mess and I don't want to do it here. Okay, so here I am out in the garage. We do have a garage. I don't work out here because it's a metal building with no climate control. It gets way too hot in the summer to work and way too cold in the winter to work, so I've converted my kitchen into a garage or motorcycle workshop. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and just sprinkle baby powder in here. I use a lot of it, probably more than most guys do. It's cheap, and I really like to make sure that the tube's not going to chafe on the inside of the tire. You just kind of want to make sure you're coating the whole inside of it. You know, flip the tire around. Maybe need to put a little more in. I don't know if you can see this on camera, probably not, but I'm actually watching the powder kind of slide around in there and coat the whole tube. You may or may not be able to see, there's a lot of it just kind of coming out and getting all over everywhere, which is why I didn't want to do it in the kitchen. There's my mighty DRZ. Okay. Next step, once you have the inside of the tire nice and coated, just go ahead and stick the tube in the tire. You want to put the tube in the tire before you start putting the tire on the rim. A lot of guys will seat one, or not seat, but lever one bead on and then try to stuff the tire up in the rim. That's a recipe for bloody knuckles, and that's when you have to use like that valve stem fishing tool or squeeze your knuckles up in there and try to get that puppy through the hole. Much easier to put it into the tire first. Alright, head back. Okay, so I've got the tube in the tire, so it's time to start putting it on. I like to start on the disc side. The disc is a little bit smaller than the sprocket, so you have a little more room to work with the first side, but it doesn't really matter. You can do it either way. As I mentioned earlier, I want to pay attention to which direction I'm putting this tire on because it's not brand new and the one edge of the knobs is sharp and the other edge is a little rounded off. I want to make sure I have the sharp edge digging into the ground as the tire spins. So you got to kind of visualize it on the bike, and this is actually backwards. And this way now the sharp edge will be digging in. So next thing you do is find the hole in the rim for the valve stem. Get your valve stem nut, line up the valve stem to the hole, pull the tire, pull the tube out of the tire a little bit, and stick the stem through the hole. Put the nut on just a little bit, just enough that it's going to not fall off, and then start pulling the tire towards you to get the rim on. As you're going through this process, you want to try to keep this valve stem as straight up and down as possible. If it ends up a little bit crooked, it's not a big deal at the end, but the more you try to keep it straight up and down, the better, because then it won't end up a lot crooked. So now I've got that in. What I want to start doing is just kind of start levering this on a little bit. Now you'll see that I'm already at one of the rim locks, like it's right next to the valve stem, and that's where I'm basically starting. So I want to actually pick this up and push the valve stem, or I mean the rim lock, into the tire. There we go. You can actually pretty much do this by hand. Make sure this side is also, which it is, so both that rim lock is completely inside the tire where you want it. And that's how we're going to start. Again, keep an eye on this, it's getting a little crooked, the valve stem, so I'm going to straighten it out There, now it's straight. Okay, and now it's just time to start levering the tire on. Now you'll see how the tube kind of wants to fold over. You don't want that to happen, so you want to just keep kind of keeping an eye on that, pushing it up in there. Now, as you're going around here, again, keep an eye on that. I actually like to go a little bit both ways, because I find if I only go one direction, it will cause the stem to get crooked. Again, just keep an eye on the tube. There we go. That should be enough. Alright. Stem is a little bit crooked. I have just not enough of this tire on that I can actually still do that, kind of straighten it out. So you want to do that while you can. And just keep levering the tire on. Make sure, keep that up in there. Okay, I'm getting to the second rim lock, which I'll show you how to deal with in a second. Again, I keep flipping sides. That's too big of a bite. I don't care about scratching my rims. Some guys do. If you do care about scratching your rims, you can get these things, rim protectors that you put on there. They're pieces of plastic you put over the rim, and then that keeps you from scratching them up. So basically, I'm going to leave that second rim lock for the last bit of the tire. That's kind of a key technique. Okay, so the whole bead on that side is now over the tire, or over the rim rather, sorry. Okay, so that was it. Again, the keys to that were, I started by putting the valve stem through the hole and then kind of shoved the rim in, made sure that the first rim lock had the bead was on both sides of it, so it's completely up inside the tire where you want it. And then I worked around like this. I didn't just go the whole way around like this way, because that I've found often ends up causing the valve stem to end up being crooked. So I kind of just went like, worked that way, and then the second rim lock is like the last piece. Now I just flip it over, and you'll notice that the bead for the second rim lock is sitting on top of the rim lock rather than the rim lock being up in the tire. So we want to fix that, and we do that just by using 2 tire spoons, one on each side. Kind of pull it up like that, push it up in, put it back down, and now it's inside. So as you can see, so far at least, having 2 rim locks has not really made it any harder. Okay, again, check the valve stem. You can still still fix it at this point. It's straight, so right now I don't need to worry about it. But again, I'm going to keep my eye on it as I spoon the second bead on. Now, you might be tempted to tighten that down to keep it from tilting, but then when you get to there, you won't be able to spoon the bead on because the tube will be like stuck against the rim. So again, I'm going to start 90 degrees in between the 2 bead locks. And this is where I'm going to use the my bead buddy. And the reason I'm using this, I think the really intended purpose of this is to try to keep the bead down in the dish when you get to the other side, which I'll talk about in a minute. I actually use it just because I find as I work my way around, as I'm spooning on over here, this piece will want to pop off and the Bead Buddy does a good job of preventing that from happening. So just going to start going around. Now I'm at this rim lock, so I'm going to push it. I guess I already hooked it. I'm going to push it up into the tire and then spoon the tire on underneath it. Just working my way around. Making sure this stays relatively straight. Okay. Now I am gonna, do it this way. Actually I'm not. I'll keep going. Just keep an eye on that. Sometimes I do it the other way. Alright. Keep going around. Now, here, this is key. This is the most important part. This tire is already, the bead is starting to work its way up onto the seat instead of being down in the valley. And so it was getting a little bit stiff. I'm just going to go around with a spoon, work that down. Oh, I'm at that bead lock and pressing on it, which I don't want to do. I'm going to push that bead lock up into the tire. There we go. Make sure I'm all the way down in the dish. Take small bites, especially at the rim lock. Okay, now that's on there and the rim lock's in. Now, this is getting a little bit harder than it should be, so something's probably not going right. First thing I do is I check the bead on this side. It's not seated too much, except right here it's seated a little bit, and that's enough to make it hard. So all the way around it's not seated anymore. And look how easy it is again now. Now when you get just a little bit left like this, it can be a little hard to get the spoon under it, but not too bad. Okay, so that's all there is to putting on the second bead. Again, the key to that was when it started to get difficult, rather than muscling my way through it, I found where the bead had started to seat itself and I stuck it back down in the dish. Okay, the tire is completely mounted now. I want to make sure that the stem is still straight. It is. That's it. Tire's on. Time to go out to the garage where the air compressor is and pump it full of air, seat the bead. So, we'll go. Okay. Now, you want to start the process of inflating the tire and seating the bead. So the first thing you need to do is pull the valve stem up so that you can screw the nut down enough to get a pump or the compressor nozzle on there. It's probably enough. Now my nozzle thing doesn't fit. I have to slide it down through like this, but alright. And pump it up. You can start to see it starting to seat a little bit. You want to go ahead and pump it up a bit, then pull it off and let all the air back out. You want to do this a couple times, and the reason is that if the tube is folded at all inside, blowing it up, inflating it, deflating it, inflating it, deflating it, allows those to work out, especially in conjunction with the baby powder we put in there. So you want to fill it up, then let all the air back out, and then fill it up again. At least twice, maybe 3 times. Yeah, it's up to you. Fill it back up. This time I'm going to go ahead and let it go as high as it will. See if we can get it to seat. It's actually starting to seat. Now for seating these, my compressor is rated at 100 psi. It doesn't actually end up putting in that much. I think it puts in about 80, but I pump these babies right up to 80 psi. Guys will be like, oh, you can't put that much air in them. They'll like blow up or whatever. I've never had one blow up. And it's a good way to get the bead to seat. That side's seated. Let's see about this side. This side looks to be seated too. So that was relatively easy. Sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes you got to pump it up and down a few more times. Bounce it if there's a section where it's not seated. If you bounce it on that section, sometimes that'll seat it. Get a rubber mallet and just whack it, and that'll seat it sometimes. If all else fails and it's like, you know, mostly seated but just a little bit of it's not, you can go ahead and just ride on it, and that will unseat it. So now I've got, I don't know how much, this thing only goes up to 30. I probably have like 80 psi in there or something. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deflate it one more time and then inflate it to the pressure I actually want.